Hey everyone, Austin here with Lifted Life Garage. Today's video we are going to be talking about the infamous death wobble when it comes to these Jeep Wranglers. So we'll talk a little bit about what is the cause of it, how do we diagnose it, and what to look for if you have it, and then the fixes associated with it. So appreciate you tuning in. Let's head over to the shop and jump under the front end of this Jeep, start showing you some of the components. All right, so let's start off by talking about what is death wobble. Death wobble is when the front end components start shaking pretty violently. That usually is a result of one tire hitting a pothole or something while driving down the road. When you are driving down the road, there's obviously vibrations that occur, okay? Road vibration, bumps, everything along those lines can cause vibration. Usually the front end steering components, the suspension components are able to accommodate and handle those vibrations when you're driving. When you hit something that is big or like a big deep pothole, a board, all of a sudden your steering wheel can start shaking very, very violently. The whole front end of the Jeep is shaking. And what's actually happening is all of the components, the steering components, the vibration that occurred when you hit that pothole was too great for them to handle. And so they just kind of start vibrating very, very drastically. So when death wobble occurs, you're going to want to make sure that you bring the vehicle to a complete stop, okay? You need to completely eliminate any driveline vibration from occurring. So the best way to do that is to venture over to the shoulder and come to a complete stop. I also wanted to bring up two common misconceptions when it comes to death wobble, okay? The first one is that death wobble can only occur in lifted Jeeps. And that's actually not true. Death wobble can actually occur in any vehicle that has a straight axle for the front. So instead of independent front suspension, you have a straight axle in the steering components associated with that. Any straight axle vehicle can have death wobble occur. Now, when you lift a Jeep and you put lift kit on there, you put bigger tires, there's more rotating mass, especially when you take it off-roading and wheeling. The additional weight of bigger tires and lift kit is going to lead to excessive or more quick wear and tear on all of your front end suspension and steering components. So with that being said, it is more common in a lifted Jeep, but it can happen in factory, all right? The second myth I wanted to talk about when it comes to death wobble is that simply upgrading your steering stabilizer will eliminate death wobble, okay? Getting a bigger, beefier steering stabilizer. The steering stabilizer can serve to mask death wobble, so if you already have it, it can help prevent the vehicle from going into death wobble. But this is also masking the original cause, okay? The steering stabilizer itself is not going to eliminate or fix your problem of death wobble, okay? It's usually going to come down to excessive play in either some of your front end suspension components or any of the front end steering components. So again, getting this will help. It'll help absorb some of the road vibrations and causing less wear and tear on some of the joints. But if you already have death wobble, simply replacing your steering stabilizer with an upgraded one is not going to fix your problem. Eventually, you will get death wobble again. So you're going to want to make sure you address and fix what's actually causing the problem, not put a mask on it with an upgraded steering stabilizer. Now, what causes death wobble? Okay, death wobble usually occurs when something within the front end, either any of the steering components, any of the suspension components, joints, ball joints, anything along those lines, have some wear and play in them, okay? That can occur from loose bolts, it can occur from worn out joints and bushings, anything along those lines. So when you are inspecting or when death wobble occurs, what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna take the vehicle either into a shop, or if you're diagnosing in the driveway, you're gonna wanna check all of your front end components, okay? Now, let's walk through all the different components that you're going to want to look at and spot check. Step one is always to go through and make sure all of the nuts and bolts and everything are at manufacturer's torque specs, okay? So you're gonna wanna make sure that you come in and you tighten everything down according to the specific torque spec for that part, all right? Now, let's start off here. So up top here, you guys can see this is the actual gearbox. So the steering wheel attaches to the steering column or steering shaft comes down into the gearbox. The gearbox then in turn takes that input from the steering wheel and rotates this pitman arm, which is this little curved bracket here, and it's going to be turned by the sector shaft. So out of the gearbox, you have the sector shaft come down, the pitman arm attaches to the sector shaft, and that sector shaft rotates left and right, okay? In turn doing so, what that does is that takes this pitman arm and turns the pitman arm, makes the pitman arm swing left and right as well. Now, coming off of the pitman arm, you have your drag link, okay? The drag link attaches to the end of the pitman arm and then comes down and attaches to the passenger side knuckle, okay? So when this pitman arm swings, if you turn the steering wheel to the right, the pitman arm swings this way, it pushes the drag link in turn, opening up and turning the tire to the right side. Then, attached to the same passenger side knuckle, you have your tie rod. The tie rod attaches to the knuckle, comes across, and also connects to this knuckle here. And that tie rod is what allows both tires to turn at the same angle, all right? So that is the steering components that make up the steering of the Jeep. Next thing you're going to want to make sure is torque to spec is you're going to check your track bar, okay? The track bar attaches to the frame on the driver's side and then comes down and attaches to the passenger side of the axle housing itself. What the track bar does, the track bar keeps your axle from moving left and right when driving down the road. It's also a way of centering the axle underneath the Jeep when you lift it. So we're going to want to make sure the bolt on the frame side of the track bar as well as the bolt on the axle housing of the passenger side is torqued to spec. Then lastly, you're going to want to check your suspension components. So you're going to want to come in and look at the control arms, upper and lower control arms, to make sure that the bolts here are tightened down. The bolts on the passenger side are tightened down for the upper control arm, and then the same applies to the lower control arm on the axle side and the frame side where those go up and mount. Okay, so let's talk about how you diagnose or how to find out what parts potentially need to be replaced in order to eliminate your death wobble problem. Now, a couple different ways of doing this. Not everyone has the convenience of having a 2-post lift. So most of the time this is going to be done sitting in your garage on jack stands, right? Or in the driveway sitting on jack stands. So when you're wanting to look for play in the suspension or especially any of the steering components, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure the vehicle is sit on the ground in the off position, okay? You're going to want a buddy for this, but have your buddy, partner, whoever, sit in the steering wheel, and all they're going to do is just jimmy the steering wheel. So they're going to go back and forth with the steering wheel. And what that's going to do is that's going to be causing the pitman arm to push and pull, okay? You're going to be able to see all of the components with the steering and if there's any play in them. So again, you're going to start up top, have your friends start jimmying the steering wheel, and you're going to start up here and you're going to look at the sector shaft. So right here, hey, do I have any play? Do I have any wiggle out of this sector shaft? You should not see this move whatsoever. Do I have any play in the pitman arm on the drag link side? You know, where the pitman arm connects to the drag link. Is there any type of wobble or play in this joint here? And then follow this drag link down to the knuckle. Do I have any play where the drag link attaches to the knuckle? Follow that to the tie rod, where the tie rod mounts to the knuckle. Do I have any play or movement in that joint? And then come across over here to the other side and look on the driver's side. Do I have any play in this joint here? Then you're going to want to make sure you check your track bar, okay? So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to look, do I have any play in this joint? And again, this is only after you've already torqued everything down and you know everything is tight and torque spec'd to where it should be. So you're going to check the frame side track bar bolt, and then you're going to come down and you're going to check the axle side or passenger side track bar bolt. If you see any play in any of these components, even the slightest bit of play can cause the vehicle to have death wobble or go into death wobble. So it's important that you're going to want to make sure and you look at all those things. Now, when we check the ball joints, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put the vehicle on jack stands from the axle housing, okay? You don't want the suspension drooped when you're doing this, so make sure you lift the vehicle from the axle housing itself. and put it to where the tire is probably, 4 to 5 inches off the ground. And in essence, what you're going to do is you're going to wedge a long pry bar or whatever you have that can get in there, and you're going to lift up on that pry bar, and you're going to look at the top ball joint right at the bottom of the C and on top of the knuckle, and you're going to look on the bottom of the C and top of the knuckle on the lower mount or the lower ball joint. And what you want to see, what you don't want to see is you don't want to see that gap expand and contract. There should be no movement there. So if you see any play there, then that means that you need your ball joints replaced. And again, keep in mind all of this stuff, these are all wearable components. Obviously, bigger tires, off-roading, additional stress, how you drive it, all of that plays a part in how quickly these factory components will, will wear and tear. So that's why you can buy aftermarket track bars, aftermarket drag links, aftermarket tie rods, beefier axle housings, better ball joints. There's all replacement parts for all this stuff because they are wearable items. So there is maintenance associated with it. Now you guys can see I do have actually a hair of play out of this joint on the bottom here, more so than I should. When you see any type of movement or play out of that, focus that, that is when you can be a cause of death wobble. So, bad news is I do have some play. So it could be a joint, I could just need to tighten this down, which feels like I may need to do that. Or, the bright side of things, that means new Jeep parts.